Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this really special Irish Writers Centre climate writing session. We are delighted to welcome this evening two very, very special guests who I think you're both going to be a really wonderful addition to our evenings. Thank you so much for giving us your time. We've got Eoghan Daltun and Niamh Twomey. Hope I've pronounced your name right, Niamh. You can tell me later if that's wrong. And we are going to be speaking about what you both do, what you're interested in right now, in relation to where climate writing is going, to kind of where ideas around one anotherness and nature and things like that are going. Niamh, you're going to talk to us about what you're doing with Hive, which is really, really incredible. I know when you're going to talk to us about your wonderful, wonderful book. This one, if you haven't got it yet, people, it's absolutely beautiful. An Irish Atlantic rainforest, a personal journey into the magic of rewilding. Mancom McGann, who's been on with us before, has said it's an inspiring vision. Caroline Fraser has said the most exhilarating account of rewilding yet written. And so I would agree that it's a really incredible, incredible book. I wonder if what we might do is we might begin, Eoghan, with just kind of firstly welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're always really pushed on time. We get half an hour with the first guest and half an hour with the second. And we were kind of just saying in the green room earlier, it just doesn't quite, it feels so short, but we're really grateful for what we have. So I wonder if, just to begin for us, what you might do is kind of just tell us where you're joining us from, which feels like a perfect way in to talk about your splendid book.
Delighted to. Thank you so much for having me on, Kerri. So I'm sitting in my house near Irees on the north side of the Beara Peninsula. So if you think of the southwestern peninsulas of Ireland that stick out like toes into the Atlantic.
Sorry, Owen, it's Amy from the Irish Writers Centre. Just to jump in, sorry, unfortunately, we've lost your sound and your video at the moment. I'm just going to.
I wonder, Eoghan, if maybe would it be easy if you I know it's awful not to see, but I wonder if you tried turning the video off. It might be a bit of a stronger connection. It might work.
Yeah, I'll do that straight away. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thanks very much, Owen.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, my apologies. So yeah, the connection can be pretty poor down here, down in the remote southwest. But anyway, I'm on the Beara Peninsula, which is, I guess, the middle peninsula of those five peninsulas that stick out into the southwest, into the Atlantic. And I'm on the north side, and I'm on the farm that I've been living on for the last 15 years. So I moved here in 2009, and I've been here ever since.
Amazing. And actually, Eoghan, I think it worked quite well that your signal dropped a bit, because when I think of where you are, I mean, when I was reading your book, it's kind of all about, it really is a book about place, isn't it? And the impact that place has on our lives, on our own kind of, on our deepest self, on our activism and on our creativity. And I wonder if you could kind of just tell us a little bit about why you went there, to that really kind of wild part of this island. What drew you there?
Well, I think it was I was on a kind of a journey, and it was all, as you say, so so correctly, Kerri, it was all about wanting to deep dive into a much stronger sense of place and relationship with place. That was something that really was awakened in me through rebuilding an 18th century stone cottage in Kilmainham, Dublin, which was a big, long project, a big part of my life. But it sparked something in me that I was hungry to explore further. And really what I was looking for, I found in absolute spades down here in Beara. And it's such a special place. It's you know, I'm looking out over the Atlantic Ocean. I can see the Skelligs and 5 other islands. Like I'm looking at the McGillicuddy Reeks, including Curran Tuathal. But the place itself is incredibly diverse, both in terms of the terrain, but also the ecology. And that was what attracted me to this particular farm. It's a 73-acre farm.
It's
And
huge.
well, it is big for those of us who come from cities. Yeah. I guess everything is relative.
Yes.
But what made this particular piece of land so special is the fact that the family who were living here before us had emigrated to the United States about a century before we came. They'd mostly gone. And the fact that the land wasn't being farmed allowed natural habitat to return. So the farm was essentially rewilding itself long before that term was ever conceived. So what I found here was this wonderful wild forest of wild native trees that I subsequently came to understand was actually rainforest. So I didn't know it at the time, but the place was in a really bad state, despite its beauty and its wonder. It was in a really bad state ecologically. It was essentially dying. And the causes of that were severe overgrazing by 2 invasive species of herbivore, feral goats and sika deer. And so they were preventing the forest from regenerating by eating every last seedling, the tree seedling that germinated, and stripping out all of the very diverse ground flora of wildflowers and ferns and all sorts of other vegetation that you should have in a forest like this. It was all completely absent.
And what I've noticed in your social media presence is, and something that kind of draws me kind of close into your work, is the way that you engage with, I suppose, the way that your views on things like native and non-native kind of, and like sort of how that looks within the landscape of ecology in this island. I think recently I was observing a conversation you were having online. I think it was about rhododendron, if I remember rightly. And I wonder, could you speak a little bit to how you navigate that through your writing, I suppose, because it's a very big part of the book, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think like once you start to think in ecological terms, the idea of how an ecosystem functions is the bedrock of what ecology is about. And to understand that, I guess the paramount thing to understand is that ecosystems have evolved over almost incomprehensibly long periods of time, where you've had a whole community of species evolving together within certain conditions. And co-evolving is the key word there, because evolving together, they've been co-evolving. Now, when you bring a species from the other side of the planet, like, well, there are countless examples, but like rhododendron or American mink or Sika deer, very often, now not always, sometimes they don't present any problem, but they can be released from the ecological constraints that applied in the places where they evolved. So, you know, in talking about native and non-native, you know, because people tend to think a lot of people, it's quite natural to relate everything in a field like ecology to human concepts. And that can be very dangerous because, you know, you get people, you know, conflating the idea of non-native and native species in ecological terms with racism, with racist ideas or xenophobia.
Of course.
Which is absolutely doesn't bear any relation to, you know, and that's kind of frustrating, but I think that's it's a symptom of the very deep ecological illiteracy that many people suffer from in this part of the world. The fact that, you know, these kind of concepts are just, people don't understand them, you know, so they start relating to them in these kind of mistaken ways. So, you know.
Absolutely. We had Anya Murray on with us recently. Not recently, it was a while back, but anyway, and she was talking to us about things like kind of native hedgerow and sort of how important it is for the interrelationships between beings and species, and how when you kind of bring in in particular, I think she talked about sowing British wildflower seeds. People think, oh, that's kind of just across the water, but actually it's really, really different, and our bees need something different. And it was really, it's kind of
Absolutely.
interesting.
I mean, just to throw a random example of what we're talking about here, if you take native willows, so we have a bunch of different native willows here in Ireland, and you know, people call them sallies generically, and they hybridize. So sometimes it's not always clear which particular sally you're dealing with, but generally willow is held to have ecological relationships with 450 different species of phytophagous insects. Now, those are plant-eating insects. 450.
Wow.
Now, if you take a species like Sitka spruce, it's probably got, I would be surprised if it has more than 4 or 5, because that species evolved in North America. So in its home range, it would have probably a fantastic abundance of relationships with insects and all the other members of the ecosystem, but not here, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it almost makes me feel bad for that tree in a way. You know, it had all these really deepened relationships from that cool evolution, and then it's kind of been placed elsewhere. But I would love to invite you, Owen. I'm really confident that our group would love to hear you read from this incredible, inspiring book. Could I invite you to read a section from the book so people could get a bit of a flavour?
I'd be delighted to. So I'm just, you know, I outlined that the place was in a terrible ecological state when I arrived, and I took certain steps to remedy that situation, which above all, I applied for a grant to fence out the goats and the Sika deer, so that everything could start regenerating again. And there were also quite a lot of invasive plant species present. So I in my spare time, I set to work getting rid of those, rhododendron and about 7 or 8 others. So I'm just going to read a small passage of the book that describes the results of those restorative actions. In the years after the deer fence went up, I was privileged to be witness to the most stunning, magical transformation of the land inside. Native tree seedlings began to pop up everywhere and, rather than being immediately eaten to death, were able to carry on growing into adolescence and beyond, giving rise to what has since become new young forest in areas that had previously been just grass. Where trees were already present, a rich dormant ground flora began to reawaken, with a great profusion of woodland flowers appearing, many of them species that I had presumed were completely absent. Tapestries of bluebell, lesser celandine, wood anemone, my favorite, bugle, primrose, dog violet, pignut, sanicle, wild angelica, herb robert, wood sorrel, opposite-leaved golden saxifrage, marsh violet, yellow pimpernel, barren strawberry, wood avens, enchanter's nightshade, germander speedwell. All these and a plethora of others would burst into fluorescence in a rolling display lasting from early spring into late summer. The visual effect was one of wildly splashing impressionist colour about the blank canvas of a previously barren woodland floor. Slowly at first, but at an ever-increasing velocity thereafter, life in all its vibrancy was coming back to the woods. The many wetter open areas similarly exploded with their own palette of yellow flag, ragged robin, cuckoo flower, heath-spotted orchid, devil's bit scabious, sheep's bit, and purple loosestrife, to name just some of the many wildflowers that emerged. All this helped create the conditions for a great boon in insects, which in turn attracted additional numbers of birds. More and more, the whole place buzzed with flying creatures and rang with birdsong. The change was radical on practically every level. So that just gives some idea of what happened as a result of taking off, removing what were artificial pressures, because you have to remember that we didn't, when I say we, I mean humans, we didn't just create artificial conditions by introducing feral goats and Sika deer, but also by removing the apex predators that would naturally regulate and control such herbivorous species. So we have thrown everything completely out of whack.
In two ways, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So by removing those artificial pressures to allow the ecosystem itself to come bursting back with life was just wonderful to see, you know. And that process started about 12 or 13 years ago, but it's never stopped, you know. And
incredible.
There's been, you know, a number of rare native mammals have moved in or taken up residence or have started using the land passing through. And every day, you know, it seems almost unbelievable or incredible to say this, but even after 15 years, every day that I go into the woods, I find something new.
I hear that, and I loved that reading. Thank you so much. And it just read like kind of pure poetry, just the names of those beautiful native beings cropping up, you know, those flowers. And I suppose I recently was talking with Isabella Tree, who wrote Wilding and then Rewilding at NEP, her work on NEP Estate. And she mentioned something similar to what you're saying, that just in letting the land have itself back almost, you know, the balance was restored. And she was talking about nightingales being back kind of for the first time. But what she did note, and I was wondering if you could comment on this, was she noted that even the kind of lands and the surrounding were impacted on by the changes made at NEP. And is that something you're seeing down your way? The kind of the surrounding areas, are they being impacted on by the changes that you've made on your land?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think one important difference between what Isabella is doing and what I'm doing is that they're working on such a bigger scale. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, they have 3,500 acres to play with, whereas my place, the area that I'm rewilding is only 30 acres. So it's
Big
a very
difference.
small fraction. Although, having said that, you would be absolutely astonished at how much life there is in those 30 acres, you know?
I watch your Instagram. I really fully believe. I want to just say to the audience that I'm going to hand over quite soon to you. So if there's anything that you would really love to ask Eoghan before I ask the last question or two, please just get it into the Q&A. Anything at all that you'd like to ask Eoghan, and we'll give a few minutes to that now quite soon. So just get it in quickly. I'd love to open the floor up to you. Something I want to ask, because we're kind of a group that sort of focuses primarily on both reading but also writing work that kind of addresses the poly crisis, the environmental crises of our day. I was wondering how did the leap from sort of the rewilding, the real work of rewilding, how did you move from there into hands on a keyboard? What was that leap like? How did you move from doing the work to writing about doing the work and inspiring other people? How did that happen, Eoghan?
Well, it's a really good question, Kerri. And I'd widen the question out to say that, you know, for me, once I started restoring a rainforest ecosystem, I delved into ecology, reading as much ecologies as I could. And those two processes felt very symbiotic. It felt, you know, like when I was reading about this stuff, it felt like I was still in the woods. And when I was in the woods, I was very often digesting and processing a lot of what I had read and kind of like placing it within this physical context, if that makes sense. And
Absolutely.
similarly with writing a book or you know, having an active social media presence or having
Oh, have we lost? I think we may have lost.
We will. Hi, it's Damien here from the Irish Writers Centre. I'm
Um,
going to try and contact Eoghan and see if we can get him back. Sorry, just there he is
Oh, he's
now.
back.
He's back. Eoghan, hi, Eoghan. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Hello, welcome back. You were just
Sorry,
talking about
sorry.
that magical symbiotic relationship between the two.
Yeah.
And
It all feel it these things don't feel separate to me,
yeah,
whether it's, you know, I mean, I guess like one important realization for me as part of this journey was the dawning on me that it wasn't enough just to restore this one little patch, that it had to go further than this. It had to be something that resonated beyond just my little place, because, you
absolutely.
know, it's too small. And,
Yeah.
you know, a little handkerchief of land like that, one of the really
I'm not sure if you can still hear us.
Hi, Eoghan, just checking in on the sound again. I think we might have a little bit difficulty. I think his signal is breaking up slightly at the moment.
Yeah. There are some places in Ireland that just do not want to give in to things like phone signal and data and connection. And I think we may have lost him.
We have
We give it another wee minute. I see there's a load of really good questions, so hopefully we'll get them back.
And just to remind everyone there that we have the chat section at the bottom of the screen, and then of course there's also the Q&A. So please feel free to feed in your questions, or also you can just chat and comment on any of the, make any observations that you feel come up tonight.
I am not sure if we're oh, here we go. Hooray. Maybe
Here
we'll
I
hear
am
you.
back.
Hooray. I am going to
Hi.
welcome back. I am really quickly going to just put some of the audience's questions on you while we have you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Francis has asked, what has your experience been with walking between the worlds of literature and ecology? Any wise words for young writers / environmentalists? That's a great question, Francis.
It is a great question. And for me, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I'm in a very privileged position where I'm living beside a wild rainforest ecosystem. So throughout the process of writing my book, for example, I developed a kind of a regime where I'd spend the morning, several hours in the morning writing. And then I'd spend the rest of the day, if I didn't have anything else urgent on, I'd spend the rest of the day in the forest. And again, it was like those two, they weren't separate. It was all
Absolutely.
part of the same thing, and one was informing the other, and
Yeah.
vice versa, if that makes sense.
I think it does make perfect sense, and it's a gorgeous answer. I think that advice sounds a bit like kind of be in the places that you kind of
Yeah,
want to write about and you want to do well by.
absolutely.
David has asked, would you have a list of recommended reading for ecology? What we could maybe say there is if you maybe give like one or two books that have kind of impacted on you.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the books that have impacted on me the most would be books that people wouldn't have heard of and might find difficulty in tracking down. So, you know, the more accessible, better known books you've already mentioned one, which is Isabella Tree's Wilding. It's a fantastic book. I would also highly recommend George Monbiot's Feral.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's a whole bunch of others, you know, but really the ones that have impacted me most are more obscure works by American conservation biologists and rewilders, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think ecology and rewilding, they're areas that you go in as deep as you want to, you know. And
Yeah.
that's one of the lovely things about it is you can kind of pick and choose where you want to go with it, you know. And it's been such a joyous journey for me. And when I say that, I mean everything. I mean spending time in the woods, but
Yeah.
also delving into the mechanics of how an ecosystem works and coming to deeper understandings of what makes all of this tick.
Absolutely.
It's not just pretty flowers and nice trees and butterflies and birds, that you're starting to understand how all this stuff fits together. And that is
Yeah.
the really, really fascinating part.
Completely. Anthea has said, how can we help change perceptions of tidiness in green spaces? Do you feel hopeful about the role of writers in this effort?
I do. I would say that, you know, I really do feel that we're at the start of a wave in Ireland in which people are moving to a different place, both in their heads, but in their
Mm.
consciousness, but also in the physical manifestations of that. Um,
Yeah.
so, you know, I think. And the thing is about any kind of a revolution, and I guess in some ways this is a kind of a revolution,
Totally.
it takes a lot of different types of people working on different levels and doing what they're good at and bringing their particular skill sets and strengths to the fight to change perceptions. And
Mhm.
writers and artists are especially an especially key role, I think, in that, in changing the way people look at these issues through words or images.
Completely. That's a gorgeous place. I didn't get to get through all the questions, but what I always finish with asking guests, what brings you hope at the moment, Eoghan?
What brings me hope is seeing what nature can do if we take the pressure off. The way nature comes absolutely just roaring back. If we remove the artificial constraints that we constantly place on it, that's the real hope for me, because there's such a power in there,
Yeah.
you know,
Uh,
and it's, and I think that's one of the most important things about rewilding generally, is that it can be very difficult sometimes to feel hopeful when you look around the world at what's happening in Gaza and the Amazon rainforest and the Great Barrier Reef and the climate collapsing. It can be very, very
yeah,
difficult to not feel despair. And despair is our enemy. It's what we have to guard against. And
I agree.
I, for me, but there are other things, but the biggest thing is just seeing that power of nature once it's unleashed.
Absolutely. And that was such a gorgeous place to leave it. Eoghan, um, it's been an absolute honor to be in conversation with you. And again, as I've said to everyone, I would thoroughly recommend picking yourself up a copy of this, An Irish Atlantic Rainforest. I think it's gone to paperback.
It
I think it
has,
stayed in hardback. It stayed in hardback for quite a while because it kept going to reprint. But I
that's
think it's
right.
available now in paperback as well. So everyone needs to get their hands on a copy.
And
Owen, feel
if I might just mention that I have a second book coming out in
yes.
September, The Magic of an Irish Rainforest. It's photographs. It's more photographs than text,
Mm,
and it's rainforests all over the island of Ireland. So,
gorgeous.
from Beara to County Antrim.
And keep your eye out on Owen's socials for some upcoming events, maybe potentially in and around that, I guess, as well, Owen. Owen, feel free to remain on with us, or if you need to go and do something else, that's completely fine. I'm going to pop over and welcome our completely complimentary and amazing guest, Niamh Twomey. Niamh, thank you so much for coming on with us this evening. And Niamh, you're the editor of Hive Literary Journal. I wonder, could you tell, for anyone in the audience that doesn't know what Hive is about? It's beautifully named, it's beautifully produced. I wonder if you could just maybe give us a wee run through what Hive is.
Yeah, thank you, Kerri. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay. So Hive is a new poetry journal. It started in 2023. We just have one issue out so far. Stay tuned. But essentially, it's nature poetry from the island of Ireland and beyond. But beyond that, specifically what I'm trying to highlight with it is poetry that finds joy in nature. So I think that there's different ways of approaching ecology in poetry, and it's obviously very important to talk about doom in some cases, to be active, to have activist poetry. But what I'm kind of trying to hone in on with this particular journal is that joy that we find in the natural world around us. And I was particularly happy to be on with Eoghan, actually, because I think rewilding is essentially that as well. It's taking pride and joy from what's on the doorstep and really cherishing that. So I, I suppose I should also explain the name. A lot of people
Yeah.
think of a hive, a beehive, and I like that image of worker bees kind of huddling around this hive and creating something from nature. But actually, the word itself came from a John O'Donoghue quote, which I can remember. I don't remember the whole poem, but the quote, words may know the way to reach the dark, where the wild sweetness of the hillside is distilled in a hive under grass. So I think that's what I want Hive to give poetic voice to that wild sweetness of the hillside.
That's so gorgeous. And if people haven't got themselves a copy, are there still copies of the first edition available?
Yes, there are.
Mhm.
There are one vendor who's selling online is the Seed Savers in
That's
East
where I got
Dublin.
mine.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, I got mine there, and I can thoroughly recommend that people pick it up. There's some incredible writing in there. I had the honor of listening to Eleanor Hooker read her poem Honesty, which is in the collection, recently in East Clare, which is where you're from, Niamh. And I wondered if I could ask you, do you feel like the place that you came from kind of had an impact on you starting this kind of journal? Do you think they're linked, like the way Eoghan was talking about the place impacting on his book? Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I'm not sure that it's not a conscious thing. And I actually write very little when I'm at home in Clare, which is strange. But it is when I go away, I realize how mystical and quite wild it is. And I always live in cities nowadays. That's where my work and study has taken me. But it is this kind of haven of wild things to go back to. And I did grow up just tramping around running around the bog at the back of my house and swimming in slightly dodgy rivers.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I suppose that one of the things that I always want to know when I'm speaking with editors of because we do have a few really incredible literary journals popping up now. It's become a bit of a nice selection, but I'm always wondering what inspired you to do this? Because it's probably quite a lot of work. What made you decide to do this?
yeah, I suppose it was a concoction of different reasons and a different what came to my mind when I thought about it for years was all the reasons not to do it. But the fact remained that this particular kind of journal that I had in mind didn't exist. I think we do. You said, and you had Channel on last month, and they're doing excellent, really engaging with the environmental crisis in their work. And
Yeah.
but this particular kind of writing that explores the essence of, just getting excitement from nature, but not obviously
Yeah.
the environmental crisis is implicit in that, but not talking about it
Yes.
head on, but more so saying, this is a flower, how beautiful. And then
Yes.
the undercurrent of that is we should save it.
Completely. And I think having that differentiation with amongst these journals is probably indicative of the fact that there is just more good writing coming out of Ireland as we go through time that is directly speaking to the natural world. And I wonder, what has your experience been of having people send you lots and lots of poetry about the joy and beauty of the natural world? How has that been as an experience?
Really uplifting. I expected it in a way. I mean, I was aware of a lot of writers writing about their local environment, and part of the reason I set it up was to create a community and a space for them to come together. but I also wasn't aware of how much was going on out there. So I was really, really happy to receive a lot of submissions from writers I didn't know, and then learned about their work. So yeah, yeah.
I was recently talking with Kevin Barry, who the writer, and he's obviously the editor of another Irish journal, literary journal, and he was saying that he feels there's this real relationship between when he's been editing other people's work and then like it really positively impacts on his own writing process. And I wonder, could you speak a wee bit, because you're a poet yourself, I wonder, could you speak a bit to that? Does editing other people's work, receiving it, kind of placing oneself in the line of goodness, does that impact on your relationship with your work?
Yeah, I would say that you have to read deeper when you're editing, and you probably find this with moderating or with I'm doing a PhD at the moment, so I have to read very deeply for that, and anything that forces you to kind of read a book twice, not just a couple of poems before bed. It's really reading for details. I think you learn a lot from that. And especially with editing, you're looking at every decision and questioning, is it just me? If it were my poem, would I make this choice, or is this actually an improvement, or just my own judgment? So
Absolutely. And so I wonder if you could just tell us, like, what are you looking for people to send you? What is really exciting you at the moment? Because I'm really aware, I've looked at some of the participants on the call, and I know lots of them are writing cracking work. So what are you looking for people to send you right now? What are you vibing off at the moment?
I think whatever is outside your back door is what I want to read poems about, not some exotic plant that's in your head or that you found on holidays. And there are some pieces. It's not exclusively Irish work, but it's just whatever is in your immediate surroundings is what I'm kind of interested in. Writing from where we are and what we want the place we're in to look like, I suppose.
That makes total sense. Because of that joy thing, like joy is very often found, I suppose, right now in the here and now, and it's kind of, you can't orchestrate it, I suppose. And I wonder if you could tell us some of the writers that you have kind of been impacted on creatively, either as an editor or as a writer for your PhD. Who are the writers or the books as well that really sing for you? You know, what's your kind of personal reading list that you could push us towards?
Well, I either was in love with or have fallen in love with the work of a lot of the poets that I published in it. So there's Jane Clark, Eleanor Hooker, Mark Roper, Grace Wells. There's some really profound ecological poets at the moment in Ireland, and I could go on. There's so many, but also Jamie O'Halloran, her pamphlet was out with the Munster Literature Centre. Yeah, there's so many.
And do you predominantly read poetry, or are you the kind of poet who kind of gains inspiration from creative nonfiction or from short stories or from children's literature, or do you read around your subject, or do you kind of branch out?
I'm ashamed to say I mostly read poetry, but I do. It sparks more individuality in my own writing if I look elsewhere. But obviously, as a poet, I'm drawn to other poets and also I'm working on a PhD in eco-criticism, so it is interesting to read things like The Song of the Earth by Jonathan Bate and books about eco-criticism, which are quite sometimes heavy, but also eye-opening to how we can look at literature and exist within literature, and how human it is as a construct, and we need to try and pare that back, however difficult that is.
Absolutely. And can you sort of think of any ways that writers can do that, or how do you try and do that in your work? Kind of move away from that kind of egotistical human slant, human take. What are the ways that writers can do that?
I suppose this is a bit cynical, but I ultimately think it's impossible for us to escape our own head. We can only write from a human perspective because that's our perspective, but we still have to try, and it's this push to try that really excites me. When I read a poem that doesn't have an I voice in it, for example, but or where the I is a plant or a sea creature or a creature really different to humans, and it's when the poet is creatively imagining the experience of that creature, I think it can really open the reader's eye to something, to a new perspective.
Absolutely. And I mean, I can think of lots of really amazing female writers who are doing that actually right now at the moment, and it's exciting, or even have been for quite a while. I mean, Alice Oswald, a typical example. But what do you think the role of the writer is as we kind of navigate this polycrisis, as we watch so much happening on our planetary home? What do you think the role of the writer might be?
I suppose to find what it is you are drawn to write, first of all, because as I said, I'm not particularly drawn to write activist poetry or write into the doom or scaremongering in relation to the environmental crisis, which I think is really important. So if you're drawn to that, please do. To find what sparks you and what sparks your creative process, because that's the kind of writing that you will do best and you'll contribute the most with. And also, I think that it's important when you're writing to read, and also to be aware that you're reading poets from your immediate surroundings. I've found in my poetry journey, just finding poets from County Clare or from the island of Ireland writing about my local, the vegetation that I was familiar with landscapes I was familiar with, gave me permission to write about my own garden.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that spans most of kind of what we hear people say again and again and again. People need to see their own lives reflected or their own kind of experiences reflected. And I wonder, I'm just going to remind the audience, I'm pretty sure lots of you will have questions for Niamh, either for her own kind of poetic journey or for Hive, for her work with Hive. I see a question in already. So I am going to ask you, Niamh, just before I kind of hand over and begin with some of the questions that have come through. There's one for yourself. Hopefully we'll have a few more. What do you feel is the kind of the best way that a person who wants to begin writing poetry can just begin? What's the way in?
That's very hard. I still struggle myself. I just start, I suppose. Read what excites you, and maybe try to copy. It's not copying. By the end of the poem, you'll come out with something completely different. But whatever excites you, try to write something like it, and then your own personality will come out and take over.
Absolutely. Okay, another reminder, people, just to get your questions into the Q&A. We have a question here for you from Jamie O'Halloran. Thank you, Kerri, Niamh, and Eoghan. Hive is unique as a journal of eco-poetry in that its physical production embodies eco-awareness. Niamh, would you talk about finding a printing and sourcing the paper and ink used? That's a brilliant question, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Jamie. Jamie was published in issue 1. I have it here. Just for those who haven't seen it, it's printed on completely recycled paper and with environmentally friendly ink. It was just something that I thought you have to put your money where your mouth is with these things. There's no point writing environmental poems and not following through. But I recommend the printers that we went with. It was The Factory in Offaly. If you're ever printing, I later used them for my wedding invites because they were so. But yeah, I think even just the idea of using paper I kind of questioned, because you can have online journals nowadays and it saves on ink and printing, but I'm one of those writers who wants to feel it in my hand and go back to basics in a way, with have it on my shelf.
I've given it as a gift to some people, and I've given it along with these local candles as well, just because now I know why it's called Hive. When I do it the next time, I'm going to write the quote. And I feel there's something about that. You really have thought about things, haven't you? Really, yeah. And it's very, as Jamie was saying, that's really beautiful. I wonder if, and there's another question here, but I do have a few more for you as well. Right. We've got one from Alva Wheatley, also from your area. Hi, Niamh. Could you, I think it means could you give us a little poem about the big, bad, beautiful bog, or any poets writing about the bog? A good question, Alva.
The bog, sadly, what comes to mind is bog bodies, but like Seamus Heaney has written those, and Sean Hewitt most recently in his first collection, Tongues of Fire, has written about the bog. I don't know that there are
Marina
any.
Huron.
Yeah.
And Marina Huron writes really beautifully about bog, like speaking in bog tongue and bog voice. But yeah, it's a beautiful. I've just seen on Instagram that let me just make sure that I tell everybody about this when that question came up, Alba. Fiona Hallinan, who's an incredible Irish artist living in Brussels, is just about to start a project on the bog. So if anybody's into the bog, Fiona is Fink, F-I-N-K on Instagram, if you want to kind of follow along with that. But Alva, that's a great question. Alva, maybe you need to be writing those bog poems and sending them off to Niamh. We have a question from Amanda Shannon. This has been so lovely. Thank you all. Thanks for being with us, Amanda. Niamh, I am in County Clare too. I began writing poetry about nature and wildlife in relation to healing grief after the loss of my husband and finding myself. I sometimes worry it is egocentric, but it is really nature holding a mirror up for me. Are there any poets you would recommend I should read in relation to my development in this regard?
I'm going back to someone I've said already, but I feel that Jane Clark is really artful at in her ability to use nature as a mirror, just very respectfully of her surroundings, but as in bringing the grief into the landscape so they exist as one. And I think that was in a way kind of what brought me to nature as well. I think, and for a lot of people, this grief leads you to climate grief, which eventually, like ordinary grief, leads you to a celebration of the thing you're grieving.
Absolutely. I would also recommend, Amanda, there's a poem that won the single prize for the forward prize for poetry, which is called My Blue Hen, and it's by Anne Gray. And it's, if anyone hasn't read it, have you read it, Niamh? Have you read My Blue Hen? Everyone needs to just go and Google My Blue Hen, Anne Gray. It's a cracking, really beautiful poem about grief in the natural world and folklore, and I would thoroughly recommend it. That was a lovely, really lovely question, Amanda. And I want to just ask people, we've got another few moments. If you have any other questions at all for Niamh, please just pop them in. I have another question or two, and then I'm going to ask her the final question, and then we're going to have a short break and we'll come back and do some writing together. Niamh, I was wondering if you could tell us when you began writing about the natural world. What did you first write about, and when was it?
Actually, I think it was in lockdown. And I was sending poems to my friends. I was living in Cork City, and my friend Molly Twomey, a lovely, wonderful poet, sent me an email back once, and she said, "You are still in the middle of Cork City, aren't you?" Where are these poems going? So I think I started writing ecological poetry before I was aware or consciously thinking about it, and it was maybe a strange way into environmentalism, but it was obviously something that was at the back of my mind. And then reading poets that I loved, and just writing my own poems kind of brought that out. So it was not too long ago, but
that's gorgeous, and I think very inspiring to hear that, because quite often we hear that people started writing when they were kind of 4 or 5 and then people have this idea that there's this barrier up, but actually we can start whenever we want. And I imagine, maybe were there people who did anyone send you work to Hive that maybe had only started writing? Are you aware of, were there newbies sending you work, do you think?
yeah, there were a few who said it, and it was so lovely to hear that they trusted me with their work. And so you can feel that spark for the writing. I think that it's hard to, not that all poets have joy in their writing, but when you first start writing, it's so exciting.
Absolutely.
Holding on.
Yeah. So Zoe Devlin has said, during COVID, many folk discovered nature, and I think it is that discovery that may eventually lead to us respecting nature far more than we did, and beautiful nature poetry helps. I agree. I agree with that. And I suppose it's kind of where you began as well, had you kind of always been into nature and then you hadn't really been writing about it, or?
Yeah, I think subconsciously it was there. As you mentioned earlier, you're living where I'm from originally, so that mystical area obviously sparked something. And I also I read something recently in The Song of the Earth by Jonathan Bate about so keystone species. The grey wolf in Ireland was it's only when they're lost that we realize they were kind of holding the whole ecosystem together in a way, and more than so much is lost with this one creature and this one species. And the writer said, what if poets are a keystone species? And maybe I like that because I was a poet.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And I would extend it to all creative writers, creative nonfiction. And there's been a lot of environmental writing emerging in Ireland recently. And yeah, it's really uplifting to me that that's coming to the fore again. And maybe you're right.
Complete.
Lockdown.
completely. Someone has asked, when will the next edition of Hive be out, please?
I can't make any promises because one thing I learned from issue 1 was everything took longer than I expected. So
Absolutely.
I won't be giving dates anymore.
And you're doing a PhD as well. Okay, I would love to ask you one final question from here and then one final question from me, and then that's us done. We started a little bit late. Suzanne Stitch has said, just said, thank you so much. Beautiful conversation and great recommendations. Greetings from Inishowen. That's beautiful. Inishowen is close to where I'm from, but you're closer to there now, Niamh. So there's this funny little thing going on. I would love to ask you the question I always ask all of our guests. Niamh, what is it that brings you real hope at the moment for what we're living through? What brings you hope?
I think it's different things on different days, but I think it's this, maybe you all, the audience. I can't see you, but I know you're there. The fact that people show up for these kinds of events, that people are reading reading environmental books, and whether or not we then personally have any impact in our lives on the environmental crisis, I think collectively we're gaining awareness just by putting those books out and putting the word out and having these events, and the fact that there's an audience and an appetite for this gives me hope, I suppose.
There really is an appetite for it. That's so beautifully said, and that is really, really hopeful. Niamh, it has just been absolutely gorgeous to have you on, and so inspiring. And tell people where they can follow along with what you're doing. It's Instagram mostly, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not. I have to say I'm not that good at social media, but Instagram,
Fine.
we're also on Twitter, and we have a website. But as I said, if you want to buy it, Seed Savers are selling it online at the moment. That's seedsavers.ie.
Yeah, and you can also pick up through Seed Savers Owen's book, An Irish Atlantic Rainforest, some of the other books that have been mentioned as well. And Seed Savers are really great just in general, so definitely check them out. Niamh, thank you so much.